Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Great Books program for June 2023, as we complete a 2-month session on one of the most seminal books by Osho, also known as Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, on the matter of Tantra, of which Bhagwan was very deeply immersed. We're very pleased to have one of our own graduate students, Raffaello Manacorda, to be making the presentation on the book. So this is Raffaello's second lecture. You all know the drill. Raffaello will speak to us for 45 minutes, an hour, and then we will open it up with our illustrious Dean of Graduate Studies, Dr. Georgi Szabo, for the beginning of a discussion, which we hope will include as many of the students as possible. So Raffaello, thank you, welcome. I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Hi, everybody, and hello, Georgie, as well. We'll have a fruitful discussion after. Thank you all for being here. I would like to start by reconnecting briefly to what we touched upon, or some of what we touched upon in the last session, also in case that maybe you're joining just in this session, and then move on to some explorations of this book, the Book of Secrets, which is for me one of the great books that influenced my life in a very deep way and in a very practical way. And already last session we mentioned one peculiarity of this book, which is that it is not only a great book in itself, but it is a great book on a great book, because what we now have as the Book of Secrets, if you go to a bookstore and buy it, is a collection of a series of talks, transcription of a series of talks that Osho gave on one of the most fundamental texts of classical Tantra. This is the VBT, or Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, that actually Osho sort of commented on based on a certain translation of that book, which is in turn contained in another book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. I have it here today, compiled by Paul Reps and Yogen Senzaki. So you can see already how this is like a network of knowledge appearing to us, coming to us through different times and different places. And while this could be potentially a scholar's nightmare, when we are working on the interpretation of a translation of a book originally written in Sanskrit, I believe, the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra is one of the central books of the Kashmiri Shaivistic tradition of India and Kashmir particularly. So while that could be a scholar's nightmare in a way, but from the standpoint of a practitioner, and I would say I approached it from the standpoint of a practitioner, it's actually beautiful, because by studying and reading the Book of Secrets, we get to both have a transmission of Tantra through the lens, through the eyes of Osho, and Osho's unique personality and spiritual transmission colors this vision very deeply, which is great, because it is really like sitting in front of Osho in many ways. This is valid, by the way, for all Osho's books, which are all of them transcriptions of his live talk. So we touched upon these points in the previous session, and also we gave somehow a container and a framework of what Osho intended for Tantra, Osho's interpretation of Tantra, and also Osho's interpretation of the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, the text that his exposition is based on. And we said that Osho's way of looking at Tantra is both simple and powerful, and perhaps demystifying in many ways, because he would always say, repeat again and again, and you will find what I'm about to say repeated many times in the Book of Secrets, that Tantra is mainly and pretty much only a science or even a technique. Osho will even say in a few passages of the book that the word Tantra means technique. Now, as with every Sanskrit word, they tend to be very polysemantic, so there's all kinds of nuances to this, and some people will translate Tantra more as thread and weaving and web, but the point being that Osho presents Tantra to us as a very practical set of instructions to attain a certain state, but never a description of the state. In his words, he would say that trying to describe what, in modern language, we would perhaps define as a state of non-dual awareness, state of unified sense of being, is actually misleading. Just trying to describe the final destination, and that rather we should, like bona fide spirituality, should focus on giving us the techniques whereby we can attain a certain state or experience being in a certain way. For me, when I approached the Book of Secrets about 15, 16 years ago, that was extremely refreshing. Coming from, I don't have a particular spiritual or religious background, but I do come from a Christian country and a culture around me as I grew up that seemed to be giving religion the task of telling me and telling all of us what a rightful life would be or would feel like. And from this standpoint, the fact that Osho from the onset of the book described Tantra as an amoral spiritual science, not immoral, not moral, but amoral. So something that doesn't have an investment in so much in teaching us the right way to do things, but more into bringing us into a state of awareness, with the assumption that from that state of awareness, we will live our life in a certain way. That for me felt very, very refreshing. And I immediately embarked on the meditation on this book and on the practice of the meditations of this book with a lighter heart. So that might be also something that for some of you who are listening, who have a certain association with religion and spirituality of a certain heaviness, might actually make a difference. Of course, it is the irony of things that Osho himself, during the course of his life, was identified oftentimes as a guru, as a spiritual master, despite the fact that he did a lot to break that image. But in his playful and oftentimes contradictory way, he would destroy that image with one hand and sort of rebuild it with the other, perhaps also to bring his disciples and the wider public into a state of confusion, into a state of having to embrace paradox also through observing his own life, Osho's life. That's a little bit of a digression, but I wanted to create some context for what we're going to address, which is not simply, a sacred text that we have received in a sort of impersonal way, but is a text that is very inextricably linked to the personality and to the spiritual genius of a man that lived in the 20th century. So we also said last time that, roughly speaking, this is not exactly precise, but roughly speaking, the 112 meditations contained in the Book of Secrets have a certain order to them, which roughly goes from the more gross, meaning techniques that have to do with the body, with breath, with physical movement, to the more subtle. And somehow in the middle of this sequence is the first set of meditations that I would like to approach today that have to do with sex. And this, of course, can open a big Pandora's box, because Osho himself during his life as a spiritual teacher, had to deal with the problem of being identified as a sex guru and with all the different press that can come with that, specifically and especially in India, but also in the United States, when he moved with kind of a group of followers and created a residential community in Oregon. Now, without wanting to go too much into the controversy that Osho was the subject of, which had to do with many aspects of his personality and life, not just with the welcoming or the speaking about sex, this is an issue that we will find and we will encounter every time we approach Tantra from the angle of Osho or from other angles. Because while it is absolutely clear that Tantra doesn't speak all the time about sex, or is, it's not focused on that, but it is true that as a spiritual stream, as one of the big spiritual streams that were born in India and then somehow crossed over to what we describe as the West, although it did so very, very lately. Actually, we could argue that Osho was one of the main responsible, one of the people that were responsible for bridging the Western audience to Tantra. So although it did that fairly lately, it is one of the big spiritual streams coming from India on a peer basis with the other streams that we know about, including Buddhism, including Advaita, Vedanta, and others. So the peculiarity of Tantra is not so much that it includes a study or an exposition of sex. That's just kind of like the thing that strikes our imagination the most, perhaps. The peculiarity of Tantra is that it presents itself as a spirituality that embraces the whole of manifestation. So the whole of samsara, if we want to use more terminology coming from Buddhism, and we know the tension and the creative tension that exists between samsara and nirvana. And in other Hindu traditions, it would be the tension always between the manifested world and the seeking of an escape, of a transcendence of the manifested world. In Tantra, this is different. Tantra comes with a statement that everything that we see, touch, smell, taste, including our own bodies, including other people's bodies, including food, nature, and whatnot, is actually an access point to the divine, or to use a different but somehow equivalent phrasing, it is the divine embodied. It is Shakti. It is the complement and the concert to consciousness, which is represented in a humanized form in Tantra by Shiva. So this duality of Shiva, Shakti, masculine, feminine, consciousness and energy lends itself very clearly to the exploration of the phenomenon of sex, of sexual union. And you will see now when I present to you the sutras, some of the sutras that are dedicated to this topic, that actually what the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra first, but also what Osho has to say about sex is actually not all that scary or weird. It's actually, there's a lot of common sense. But the mere fact of including sex, and you will notice that I'm not using the word sexuality, but the word sex. And this is because Osho made a very clear distinction that I will go into in a moment. So the very inclusion of the phenomenon of sex into a spiritual teaching is not something that we will find in every spiritual tradition, as you can imagine, but only in some of them. And for reasons that are maybe for another time, it seems to create sort of like a division or a categorization of spirituality in different ways, according whether the phenomenon of sex, the phenomenon of the body, of the physicality of the human condition is included and made part of the journey or not so much. So let's dive into the text, and it will give me an opportunity to touch some of the points that I mentioned and to expand it. And then we'll give some time to this, and we will move on to other points that are equally as relevant and as important. So in the Book of Secrets, you will see that the sutras, the meditations, are divided in chapters. This is a totally arbitrary division, by the way, that was made by the editors of the Book of Secrets. You will not find it in the original text. And chapter 33 is the one that is titled The Spirituality of the Tantric Sex Act. It is composed by 5 sutras. Each sutra is its own technique, its own meditation. And the first of them reads, "At the start of sexual union, keep attentive on the fire in the beginning. And so continuing, avoid the embers in the end." At the start of sexual union, keep attentive on the fire in the beginning, and so continuing, avoid the embers in the end. So, first of all, what we already said, the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, one of the most sacred texts of Kashmiri Shaivism, which some would consider to be perhaps the most elevated spiritual tradition within the galaxy of Tantra, that contains many different streams. Sex is offered, mentioned as one of the ways to access a state that cannot be described, among many others. There's perhaps between 5 and 7 sutras dedicated to sex out of 112. So, you could say that's something around 3 or 4% of the whole catalog. But since it is brought to us at the same time, by the way, when the original texts were born in India, the original text of Tantra, we are more or less in the same time where other traditions in parallel were asking spiritual practitioners to steer away from sex completely. So why and how can sex actually be a doorway to a spiritual awakening? And the answer that Osho will give has very little to do with sex, but it has a lot to do with union and wholeness. So at the end of the day, and again, words are going to be imperfect here, but at the end of the day, we could say that somehow all of these techniques presented by Osho in the Book of Secrets are meant to facilitate a state of merging with life, of being one with life, of dissolving the artificial barriers that Osho would say the mind creates between us and the universe, which is also us. Now, this is not meant in a state of some kind of ecstatic, fusion, such as the one that we can, taste, like while dancing or with intoxication. They can remind it, but Osho and Tantra intended that as a state of awakening, from the illusion of being a separated entity. So you can see many, many points of overlap with other traditions, both coming from the East and the West. And so how can sexual union facilitate this access? Well, Osho would say it can, insofar as what we are engaging in is sex and not sexuality. This is why I made the distinction before. It's just a peculiar use of words, if you will, but it speaks to something very important, and Osho will spend many pages or many words clarifying this point. For Osho, sex had a reason to be included in spiritual works because there is the possibility during a sex act with someone else or with oneself, as will be illustrated by the third of these 5 sutras, to forget oneself, which means to stop operating as an individual identity that is reflecting, comparing, evaluating, having a certain direction, having a certain goal. This is why this first sutra, perhaps surprisingly, for when you read it for the first time, says, okay, here's what you can do. When you are engaging, at the beginning of engaging in a sexual union with someone, keep your attention on the beginning and avoid the embers in the end, which is a poetic way to say, stay with the awareness there where you are and don't rush ahead. Don't go to a conclusion. Don't jump to an objective, a final destination of this union. Just stay in the beginning. Make it an eternal beginning. And Osho would say, in some way, borrowing from Freudian psychoanalysis, which he loved to do. He loved to borrow from many different thinkers. As we shared in the first meeting, Osho was, for like a lot of his life, a university professor. So he had a very deep familiarity with both Eastern and Western culture and different fields of culture. And so he would say, look, we are all living in a state of neurosis. We're all living in a state of split personality where we are not whole because we have interiorized some psychic mechanisms that are constantly observing what we're doing and judging it, evaluating it, labeling in this or that way. And there are some activities in our life, sex is one amongst them, but also dance, or could even just be eating, and there are sutras dedicated to that as well, that offer us the opportunity to get out of that split. Interestingly enough, Osho said a few times in the Book of Secrets that in general, the more dangerous an activity is, the more it has the potential to bring us into that state of full awareness, which both means losing oneself as far as a separated identity, but also finding oneself as far as being one with the flux of life. And for example, he would say provokingly, as Osho often did, that it is not very common for a businessman to attain the highest peak of spiritual realization, because for most businessmen, winning, losing at the money game, one day you win, you have a successful, trade, one day you have an unsuccessful one. It's kind of like a game that doesn't really bring out the most alive sense of immediate danger. But he would say, however, a gambler, someone that goes to the casinos and gambles all of their money, that's much more likely to bring someone to a spiritual awakening. It's a provocative way of saying that, but he actually was serious in saying, well, if you're going to stake all of your fortune on the spin of a roulette, there is a chance that through that moment of fully focused awareness where everything is at stake, where you could lose all or gain all in a split second, then you will access a state of total full presence and again, as I said before, being one with the flux of life. He also gave other examples to make the same point, but the point that I want to bring here is that many times, Osho's teachings sounded or were very unorthodox because he was very good and very precise at demystifying and debunking the so-called ideas that we have around spiritual growth or spiritual awakening, where we can transform spiritual awakening into a safe step-by-step procedure that just brings us from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 until we finally attain the ultimate step. He would always say, you need to risk something. You need to have not just skin in the game, but the whole of you needs to be in to actually really be in the flux of life. And a sexual act can be one of the ways to enter that flow, to enter that flux. To continue on that note, the second sutra says, when in such embrace, sexual embrace, your senses are shaken as leaves. Enter this shaking. So again, Osho is, the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, and Osho commenting on it is fond of giving us access points to a state that we could almost describe as terror, or unbounded joy, or a state where your hair stands on your head and on the rest of your body, like electrified, and when you are in that full aliveness that is running through you without any obstruction. And Osho would say that what is in the way, what is that blocks the flow of life from fully rushing through us is our mind. It is our ideas, our concepts. But when he said mind, I would personally translate it more as our identity. The identification, the crystallized bits of our thinking and feeling processes that say, this is me, and therefore want to hold on to a little island in the stream and build our little castle, our little empire on it. All of these techniques, in one way or another, are bringing us outside of the little castle, back into the stream, down into the rapids, and into the full ecstasy of living, being one with life. So from this standpoint, it is perhaps not surprising that sexual union is mentioned as one of the ways to attain that. But the three following sutras on this chapter, that, as I said, it's an arbitrary division, but they go well together, show to us that this can be expanded to so many other ways and directions. The third sutra says, even remembering union without the embrace, transformation. So here's where, and this, is part of the movement from the gross to the subtle. Here's where immediately after suggesting sex as one of the ways to enter the non-dual state of awareness, for lack of a better term, the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra tells us, actually, even just remembering union is enough without being in an embrace with anybody, transformation. And further on, from sex, we move to joy, to boundless joy, as I was saying before. And the fourth sutra says, on joyously seeing a long absent friend, permeate this joy. Again, these are all different pointers to the same hill, if you will, or to the same cave. How many times in the past we have been so joyful to see someone that we hadn't seen for a while that all of a sudden we entered into a state of hyper awareness. Smells, sounds, colors became so vivid that for a moment we had an opportunity to abide in a state of total fusion with the inner and the outer world, dissolving the barrier between the two and just being life. It is true, I can, for me, this is an experience that I can really relate to, that at times in meeting a beloved person that I hadn't seen for a long time, I was on the door of that state. But then what happens? Osho will say, well, what happens is that we cannot tolerate such a high energetic state, so we dump that awareness, that energy somewhere. And in the case of reuniting with a friend, we basically dump it on them. We run towards them and say, I'm so happy to see you, and it's about you, and tell me, where have you been? And so our awareness jumps out, finds a destination, finds something to latch on, and then somehow we don't have to feel the fullness of our state. This is why the sutra, and every word counts in this kind of spiritual synthetic language, says, on joyously seeing a long absent friend permeate the joy, permeate this joy. So it's not about permeating our friend. It's not about, making our friend the object of contemplation, although there are sutras that will also teach us to do that. But in this particular case, it is about entering the joy. And the last one that I want to share before I conclude this part of our time together says, when eating or drinking become the taste of food or drink and be filled. So we started from sex, we moved into meeting someone that we really love and we haven't seen for a long time. We ended up with eating or drinking. And yes, how many of you, I don't know if this is a common experience for everybody here in this room, but it has been for me a few times in my life, through eating or drinking, I have felt on the door, on the threshold of a state that is indescribable, that is the highest possible state a human can attain. And of course, we could say, oh yes, that happens when we eat something delicious and special and exotic. But in my experience, while that's one of the ways that has happened to me, it also happened after fasting. So it is the same process that we explored before. When I have been away from someone that I love for a long time, and then I see them, all of a sudden, that experience taken away from a habit, taken away from something that is already part of my story of me, can become an access point to the ultimate. Same for eating and drinking. Unfortunately, though, most of us, and I include myself, tend to make a habit out of eating and drinking, and tend to not really feel what's happening when we eat and when we drink, because we are thinking about a million things, including about our food. So when eating or drinking become the taste of food or drink and be filled, same as before, the trap is to focus on the food and go like, oh my God, this apple is wonderful. This apple is so sweet. And then there is me, there is the apple, and there is the whole constellation of the illusory reality, Osho would say, of having a subject and an object and an action happening between the two. The kind of reality that we navigate on an everyday basis that is very comfortable for our mind to navigate, but that is different from the state that Osho is speaking about. So instead of focusing on the apple that I'm eating, just become the taste. It's not about think about the taste or focus on the taste. It's become the taste. Just as before, we had the instruction to permeate the joy. So again, it's not about a contemplation of a phenomenon, it's about becoming that phenomenon. And in that, again, be filled, which is a way to say enter the stream of life and be one with it, just through eating or drinking. So I wanted to, start this exploration, this second exploration of Osho's commentary, basically, on the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, with this set of sutras that bring us into these mundane activities, from sex to meeting a friend to eating or drinking, and just show you how these mundane everyday activities can be as many access points to the ultimate. But this is not to say that the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra doesn't also provide us with instructions that are not mundane, or maybe less mundane for the kind of lifestyle that many of us lead in the current society. There is a space for everything, and there is a space also for very subtle instructions that have not so much relationship with the world, the manifested world that we can touch, smell, and taste, but that have to do with playing, and I use this word on purpose, playing with our inner state, with our awareness. And through that, allowing the awareness to turn onto itself and to enter through the door. So let's have a look at that. And with this, I will present some of the final sutras, some of the final techniques in the Book of Secrets in the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra. And I want to start with one that has to do with darkness. This is the meditation number 75. You will find it, 76. You will find it on page 833, at least in my edition, and it's chapter 51. And it says, in rain during a black night, enter the blackness as the form of forms. The next one, I just want to read the two of them together to you. The next one basically addresses the case where we want to work on darkness, but we don't have a rainy night available. When a moonless rainy night is not present, close eyes and find blackness before you. Opening eyes, see blackness. So folds disappear forever. So same process, two versions. One of them is where we have a supportive environment around us, which Osho describes as a rainy, moonless black night, but it could also be some kind of darkness room or darkness retreat that we enter into when we are actually surrounded by darkness. And the second version is when we don't have that, and so we just use the closing and the opening of the eyes. Osho will clarify very clearly that the second version, the one where we just close our eyes, is more difficult. It's more challenging. If we can use the support of a starless, moonless, dark, rainy night, all the better, or of a dark room. But whatever way we choose, why this insistence on darkness? Why actually blackness is the translation that we're working with here? Why are we invited to enter the blackness, and why is blackness described as the form of forms? Obviously, you can hear from the language being used here that we are starting to touch upon some very deep spiritual teachings here, the form of forms. So this passage, the passage that explains these sutras, was one of the most important ones for me to read when I read the Book of Secrets, because not only gave me another access point that I've used very deeply, the access point through darkness, but it also gave me a spiritual refrain that was very important for me. In some way, we are all, I mean, I will speak very generically here, but as a culture, we are all biased in favor of light. In our culture, light is usually associated with good, with health, with positive outcomes, and dark, I can give you many examples of that, it's probably not necessary. Dark is associated with death, with something that may be evil, so with a moral judgment. And that is one of the characteristics of our culture, based fundamentally on the Judeo-Christian revolution, that is in turn based on a spiritual revolution that happened way before the birth of Christ, and that has to do with the transition to what Anne Baring would call the solar era, or the solar phase in humanity. To make the long story short, a few millennia ago, there is this noticeable and widespread transition in the mythologies and in the spiritualities from darkness to light, from moon to sun, from the sort of like worshipping darkness as the point of origin, as the point of creation, and also as a point of association with womb, the womb is dark, right? The place where creatures are born from is dark. And that shifts to a very, in an intense way, in a very energetic and intense way, that shifts to a worshipping of light and fire. Now, there are many reasons why this shift happened. It's not either, my understanding, it's not good or bad. It's just something that we collectively went through. The result of that, though, is that for most of us, there is a residual association of light with good and darkness with bad, evil. One of the problems with that, Osho would say, is that that leads us to hyperactivity. It's, if we are associating darkness with something undesirable and something to run away from, then obviously we're going to try and maximize our waking time. We're going to try and maximize the time that we spend with our eyes open, the time that we spend doing something, the time that we spend inundated by light, whether it's natural or most cases nowadays artificial. So these techniques enter from a completely different door. And by the way, light is also an access point to the ultimate, and there are other meditations that deal with that. These techniques bring us through darkness. And one of the reasons why darkness is so powerful is because darkness doesn't need any activity to be. Osho would say, tomorrow the sun will rise and there will be light. Then in the evening, the sun will set and there will be darkness. But without the sun having to do anything, so before the sun rises and after the sun sets, darkness is there. And as you know, purely from a standpoint of physics, this is a truth in cosmology, where light needs energy and radiation and vibration to be, whereas the empty space by its own nature is dark. It's not steady, it's not completely still. There is still an element of radiation, but what we identify as visible light that we can see, requires a ton of energy to appear to us. So there is something eternal about darkness. There is something where darkness doesn't have a source and therefore is truly eternal, whereas light has a beginning and an end, from this standpoint of the exploration that Osho is offering to us. So therefore, in a starless, moonless night, dissolving into darkness, entering the blackness, or doing that through closing our eyes, which is more difficult but still possible, we come back to a state where nothing is happening, where nothing needs to change, where nothing needs to shift. It's a state of extreme relaxation. It's a state of restfulness. It's a state that some of us at times may feel almost as a depression, spiritual depression kind of state. However, through that, there is a doorway. And Osho will say, once you touch that darkness, that blackness, one of the things you can do is bring a piece of that darkness with you. Bring it with you in your busy lives. Bring it with you in your relationships. Bring it with you in your transactional activities. Because when someone moves with a piece of darkness inside, then nothing can affect them or touch them at a certain level. They move with a deep state of relaxation inside, with a deep state of emptiness inside, that actually makes them very different from the majority of the people we are used to deal with, that are instead constantly active, constantly emitting energy, constantly trying to maximize their light. Even in today's self-development world, you will always hear things about how to shine more and how to make your light shine brighter. And here Osho, in his provocative way and based in a very deep lineage of spiritual exploration, says, well, actually, for many of us, darkness is the door. It's the form of forms. That's the expression that's being used. Why? because forms, which is another way to say individual identities, individual objects, people, things, can only exist on the backdrop of darkness, of formlessness. So if we are looking for the ultimate form that hasn't got to have any shape or any color, that is darkness. That is a blank or dark slate, blank not in the sense of white. And so by entering darkness through the night, through our closed eyes, we dissolve in the form of forms, which means we are one again with the flow of formless life. Again, the words are imperfect here, but you get the essence. So we're moving towards the last couple of meditations that I want to share with you. And as I said before, they enter into the most subtle realms of what Osho and the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra wants to present to us. And these are the meditations number 109 to 112. So literally the last three. And just give me a second while I find them in my digital edition. And here we go. The first one, so they are grouped in chapter 79 of the Book of Secret, and the title given to this chapter is The Philosophy of Emptiness. I'm going to read you the four meditations, not three, four, number 109 to 112 in a row, because they are very connected to one another. The first one reads, suppose your passive form to be an empty room with walls of skin. Empty. And this is it. This is the first sutra. The second one, gracious one, play. The universe is an empty shell wherein your mind frolics infinitely. The third one, sweet-hearted one, meditate on knowing and not knowing, existing and not existing. Then leave both aside that you may be. And the fourth and last one of the 112 meditations, enter space, supportless, eternal, still. So before I go into some commentary of these last four meditations, and then I close it and open for comments, I just want to bring us back to the very, very first beginning of the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, the introduction, if you will, where Devi, Shiva's consort, opens saying, "Oh Shiva, what is your reality? What is this wonder-filled universe? What constitutes seed? What centers the universal wheel? What is this life beyond form, pervading forms? How may we enter it fully above space and time, names and descriptions? Let my doubts be cleared." So the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra opens with this like passionate invocation from Devi, from Shakti, saying, clear my doubts. I want to transcend the oppositions of duality. I want to enter fully above space and time, names and descriptions. And Shiva will spend 111 sutras to respond to that, giving so many options to accomplish what Devi asks for. And then in the end, the last instruction will be enter space, supportless, eternal, still, which kind of sums it all up. It's like, I've given you so many ways, I've given myself, because remember that Devi and Shiva are just one, playing with itself. I've explored so many doors, and at the end of the day, I've always been where I wanted to be. I've always been in the state that I was striving to reach. And I only need to enter space, supportless, eternal, still. Supportless. So the last meditation basically is the final injunction to drop all techniques, all props, all supports, all teachers. Just like in the story of the Buddha, Buddha's most beloved student, got enlightened the day after Buddha died. So, the support of the master had to be removed before Ananda could reach Buddha's first and most loyal and faithful disciple could reach. Buddha had to disappear. Buddha had to go. And Ananda was desperate in seeing Buddha dying. He was like, Master, what are we going to do without you? And then when Buddha died, he attained. So, and that, on that note, the last 4 meditations are inviting us to drop into emptiness, the emptiness of our own inner universe. And that's when Shiva says, imagine your inner world as an empty room with walls of skin. There is no one inside those walls. It's empty. There is no one in the house. And at the same time, be playful with that. Directly responding to Shakti, to Devi, Shiva will say, play. This universe is an empty shell where your mind frolics, plays infinitely. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to attain. Just play. And since you are already playing, because the whole text starts with Devi playing, asking, this is the conversation between lovers. It's not serious in the sense that we understand seriousness. So therefore, basically, Second Sutra is telling us, continue playing. That's it. There is nothing more. Just realize that the whole universe is an empty space or an empty shell wherein your mind, your consciousness, you who are listening to me in this moment, are that. You are playing, your consciousness playing in an infinite space. And the third one is the invitation or the response to what Devi was asking. How can I go beyond the labels and the oppositions? And the answer is, sweethearted one, meditate on all the opposites, on knowing and not knowing, on existing and not existing. Meditate on that. Give it space, give it consideration, give it attention, and then leaving both extremes or both poles aside, be. This is where most clearly, perhaps, the teachings of the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra connect us to the state of Advait, of non-duality, of not necessarily considering duality as an illusion, as a lie, as something that we need to transcend, embracing it, considering it, even meditating on it, and then setting it aside so that you can be. There is no being in duality. There is only being beyond duality, because when we are in duality, as necessary as this can be for our existence, we are always partial, separate. There is me and not me. There is being and not being. There is knowing and not knowing. So by definition, we're not being, because being is the totality of being. And just to conclude now with Osho's words, as he comments on the last sutra, I found these words to be very inspiring, so I want to share them with you. He said, the space has no beginning, no end. And that space is absolutely soundless. There is nothing, not even sound vibrating, not even a ripple. Everything is still. That point is just within you. Any moment you can enter it. If you have the courage to be supportless, this very moment you can enter it. The door is open. The invitation is for all and everyone. But courage is needed. Courage to be alone. Courage to be empty. Courage to dissolve and melt. Courage to die. And if you can die within to your inner space, you will attain to the life which never dies. You will attain to Amrit, to immortality. So with these words, I want to conclude this part and invite Georgie or Jim, whoever wants to offer some comments on questions, and then also the other students that are listening. Thank you for listening. As you can see, it's a very passionate book for me, and I'm very grateful to share all of this with you, and I'm open to your comments. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic. Oh my goodness, what an amazing second lecture. You must give us a course on this book, really. This is not enough. This is just the beginning. I really would, I would love that. I would be the first to sign up. What a rich presentation. I so love this book. I did say that at the beginning of your presentation that I must get it, and I definitely will. But although I would really miss, I would like to have your commentary. So this book is almost empty without you. So I actually did a lot of jotted down a few comments. Really, when I was listening to your first presentation and you described it, or rather Osho described that Tantra is a science or rather a technique, what came to me was a tool. And I just thought, wow, this is really brilliant. I love it so much. And I was thinking that, is it, or would you, and now I'm interested in your description or your answer, not necessarily Osho, especially because we can't really ask him, or rather, it may take some time to get the answer from him. That besides Tantra, would you consider other approaches to reach the ultimate reality as a tool? So what I'm getting at is Tantra is not the only tool. Every kind of approach is a certain tool or a technique, not a description, not how to get that type of thing.
Yes, I think that's a valid point of view. For example, let's say Christian prayer can be seen as a technique to attain certain states of communication with the divine. So yes, for me though, having been exposed to, different religions and forms of spirituality before I met Tantra, which I met before the Book of Secrets, but I would say the Book of Secrets was my more complete initiation and approach into Tantra from a study standpoint. So before that, I had never felt such sincerity in a spiritual book saying, hey, look, these are techniques. They don't claim to be anything more. Okay, so don't try to read between the words and to turn these words into sacred mantras. No, this is an instruction. All you need to do is follow it. If it doesn't work, there is another one. There is 112. So that for me was very refreshing. That just put me in a very, I can do this state of being, versus the feeling that oftentimes I had when reading, spiritual or sacred books of a feeling of inferiority, as if I was approaching something that was too complex or too elevated for me to understand, and that my work was in enhancing myself so that I could understand it. And here comes Vijñan Bhairava Tantra saying, okay, 112 ways, just do it. Don't waste more time, go for it. So that for me was very refreshing. And it also gave me a sense of somehow ethical sincerity, if that makes sense, which I really appreciated.
No, thank you. No, the next thing that I wrote down as you were speaking, that he doesn't, I really like that he doesn't offer a description of that state. And then when I wrote it down, I wrote my commentary because of the subjective explanation. And then straight after that, you said the amoral aspect. And I'd like to connect these two things, that would Osho give room to the subjective experience and explanation? Like he doesn't really, we said that the Tantra, the way he explains it, it's a tool, it's a technique. So you use it as you wish. So he doesn't kind of like forces the outcome, right? So he leaves a lot of room to the subjective experience and explanation. Is that true or not, you think?
I think it's true, but also Osho had an unwavering faith in these meditations. So he said, look, these are not just some random, techniques that came out yesterday. These have survived the test of time. So therefore, while the temperaments are different and subjective, they are guaranteed to bring everyone to the same place in the end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's where the objectivity resides in that state, which is the same destination. However, it doesn't matter from where you got to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the objectivity resides in that. But other than that, I absolutely agree with what you say. So much so that Osho had no particular problem in contradicting himself. He would. And it's even in the book, you will find some of the questions from the participants, from the people that were in attendance of the speeches, that say, wait a minute, yesterday you just said the opposite to what you're saying right now. And Osho said, yeah, but yesterday the question was different. So my answer is arising in the same moment as the question is arising. What you need to know, though, is that both of those contradictory statements, if you just follow them, will take you to the same place.
Yeah. Thank you. Now the next point is that is it correct to say that Osho's focal point of his philosophy was the whatever technique or tool to be used, being in the present? Is it all about the awareness of presence? Is that his focal point?
Yeah, a couple of things there from my understanding of Osho. Anyway, first of all, fun enough, for someone who was a professor of philosophy, he kind of hated philosophy. He used to say that philosophy is our illness that brings us to think about life instead of entering into life. I love philosophy, so in that sense, somehow I disagree. But so I don't think that he would ever accept to be considered as someone that had a philosophy. However, from our point of observation, if I look at his teachings, then yes, the present, being in the present, but probably he would have used more the word center. He was very fond of using the word center, like coming to the center of existence, coming to the center. And of course, then, in an infinite space, the center is everywhere. There isn't only one center.
Absolutely.
But it does speak to me, when he said coming to the center, he meant our attention is always going somewhere, to the future, to the past, to the other person, to here, to there. We need to bring it back to the center. So in that sense, yes, the center is the present moment.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
his vocabulary would have been probably more that of the center.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for the explanation. Now, when you were talking about food and drink, of course, I was thinking about drinking French champagne. That's when I have that high state. Well, of course, after a couple of glasses of champagne, even a higher state. But wouldn't you think that the food and that or drinking is really connected, not just our primordial surviving kind of like gene that we need to drink and eat in order to survive, and also to memories, like when I drink champagne with usually with my friends or other loved ones, it always takes me back to great memories. So in Osho's word, how did he segment these? How did he delineate, the memories away from those pure, as you said, enter the stream of light feeling in terms of food and drink?
Yeah, I think for him and for the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra, any powerful experience or sensation is a doorway. But actually, in that sense, our memory is a problem. Because in another of the 112 meditations, it says, just look onto anything, just look onto something, but as if for the first time. So that's the difficult part. Just take something, take a flower, take a bottle, take a book, and open your eyes and look at them as if for the first time. Then that's it. You're done. But the problem is that we have memory, as you say, and that makes it so that it's very difficult for us to look onto anything as if for the first time, because everything reminds us of something else. And that's when our awareness goes away from the center. It goes to something else that is not here.
Yeah.
So that's why, in a certain sense, and please, take this with some salt, the more intense the stimulus, the better. Because those intense stimuli anchor us more in the here and now versus, oh yeah, just another glass as I've had so many times before. Kind of thing.
Yeah. But that's, again, this is the awareness of presence, isn't it? To be aware, right? That the here and now at this moment. And that's when so many of the other things that just seem to kind of like fade away. Exactly.
And that's why, he not with the food, but with the friend example, he says, when you meet a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, because that's when we have cleared the field enough that the experience of meeting that person has a freshness to it, has a newness to it. And then there is a possibility to enter into the stream. But yeah, Osho would say, animals don't need these 112 meditations. They're already in the stream of life.
Sure.
We need them because we're human.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We are different, creatures for sure. But last time you mentioned that even when there is anger arising and go back to the stream. So I was actually wondering, when you're talking about it, meeting a friend you haven't seen for a long time, what if you meet somebody you really don't want to meet, and you meet that person that clearly you have a negative feeling, like, shit. That's why.
I think it's equally valid. It's equally valid.
Yeah.
As long as we're able to follow that stream, as you said, Georgie, very clearly, follow that stream back to the source. And this is easier said than done. Because, I have so many examples, even from my last 2 or 3 days, when a strong emotion arose in me. But by the time I realized, oh, wait, this is an opportunity for me to drop back into my center, it was too late. Because I had already spilled that energy onto someone, even just mentally,
Yeah.
So it's the window of opportunity is very frequent. We have many opportunities in life, but the window is short.
Yes, absolutely. That your description was just so precise, that how we latch on, we already have put the tags on that, oh, it's you. It is, we haven't seen ages, and actually not concentrating on the feeling itself. So that is just so spot on, that it's incredible. Thank you very much for light, like shining light on that awareness. I'm going to think. Now, the other that was so deep is about darkness. You talked about, and the forms of forms. Was Osho very much influenced by Plato, because he was like, the big guy who talked about the forms, right? And the essence of forms, and the and the whole philosophy, or rather the base of the
That is a very good question, and I honestly don't know the answer whether Osho was influenced by Plato or not. Also, Osho didn't very often speak about his influences. He did speak about some philosophers and thinkers with respect, and with some kind of admiration. But not that I know. I don't know if he ever said anything about Plato. However, where the connection can happen, and every time I have to speak about Plato, it's such a big character in the history of philosophy that it's almost like he can be this and the opposite of that. But there is a very interesting couple of books by Peter Kingsley, especially one called Reality. I don't know if he's right or not, and we can all have our opinions about that. But basically, Peter Kingsley puts it on Plato somehow the philosophical responsibility of having elevated reason and logical thinking to the topmost spiritual tool, and what have we lost with that? And also just in terms of Greek, the history of Greek thought, how, according to him, Plato's intervention was like a severance from the more shamanic, darkness-based wisdom of before, which went all the way up to Parmenides, pretty much. And then Plato comes and sort of but like every great revolutionary, and Plato was definitely a great revolutionary, they build and they destroy, and the world is changed by their action. And then now, a few thousand years later, we can look back and try to make sense of it. So that's the best I can say. Out of my own intuition, I would say that probably Osho wouldn't have liked Plato so much. No. But I may be wrong. I may be wrong, and who knows?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, no, thank you. I read actually Peter Kingsley's book. I really appreciate what he wrote, and also just segueing back what you were saying about the darkness, and there's so many. I really felt that there's so many degrees to that as well, because when you said that you close your eyes at night and then there is the darkness, but clearly there is the imagination, and of course not to forget about dreams, right? So what did Osho think about dreams? Did he connect it to anything with regard to Jung or Freud or any other, or even his own thinking?
Yes, before I answer that, I just want to clarify that actually the meditation that he speaks about in the moonless night, that is with the eyes open. Okay. That's why he says, find a very dark night, and then kind of get out of your house and go into the pitch black darkness, but with your eyes open, because that will make it easier, exactly for the reason that you were saying, Georgie. Because if we close our eyes, then the whole world of images and fantasies and daydreaming and memories comes up. So he said, if you can, and again, it may be an instruction that for many of us, nowadays it's not so easy to follow that, but do it in a very pitch black night. It could be, I also think, he didn't say that specifically, but it could be in a cave. There is such darkness in caves, right? In a cave, and we don't need to close our eyes because it makes no difference. So therefore, we can be with the eyes open and enter the darkness. But you were asking about dreams, and I think overall, Osho had a lot to say about dreaming and dreams. There is this teaching, it's not specific to Osho or to Tantra, but it's found also in yoga and other streams of Indian thought, that in the night when we dream, we go through different stages of sleep, right? And they have different names and a different significance. But what's really fascinating is that the sleepless dream, which we all experience every night, right? We go through the different phases, and we get to the phase of the sleepless. Sorry, did I say dreamless sleep, the dreamless sleep, not the sleepless dream. That's another thing. So the dreamless sleep is basically almost the same as the ultimate state of consciousness that we are talking about here. There is only one tiny difference, which is, it's a big difference, but it's tiny, and that is awareness, being fully aware. So the parallel, the symmetry between our waking life and our dream life is enormous. Just as in waking life, through practices of meditation, we move into the direction of moving through the shapes and forms and colors, of our existence, not denying them in the tantric understanding, just like embracing them and saying, oh, wonderful, what's beyond that? What's beyond that? What's beyond that? And finally, we access a state of sort of like dreamless wake. So it's not dreamless sleep, it's dreamless wake. But at the same time, we do that every night. The most mundane thing. It's just that we forget.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And maybe also that there is quite some processing going on underneath. We're just not aware of that. But I do remember, and I'm sure that many of, they listen in our audience, but I woke up so many times in my life when I didn't know where I was. And there was this darkness because it was just so dark. There was no light coming in and I didn't know where I was. And that was super scary. And I was thinking about that's the ego. Or just something, whatever else, I don't know. But it just came to me when you were talking. Now, there are two more things I'd like to mention. I would like to bring in our audience because I don't want to take all the airtime here. That hopefully Laura is still here, wonderful, because she writes haiku, and I was thinking about when you were reading some of the Osho sutras that it almost resembled to me about haiku. So if I could bring maybe in a minute Laura in and ask her that what she thinks and what you think as well, Raffaello. But the really last thing I'd like to express is about the emptiness, and then I'm Buddhist practitioner, so sunyata, which is full of potential. And of course, that when Osho says that play is like play, right? You mentioned this, that so did he mean play with the whole concept of this emptiness and fullness type of thing, or not necessarily?
I think, if we go back to that sutra, which is basically one of the last ones, where the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra has the injunction of play, the explanation that Osho gives on that is, look, the main difference between doing something playfully and doing something seriously is that when you are playful, you are involved, engrossed in what's happening, and you are not outcome oriented, goal oriented in the same way that when you are serious. So to him, the problem of seriousness was that we enter into a mindset that is not ideal for these kind of practices. For example, the serious mindset is, okay, I'm doing this thing. If I can find a shortcut to do it faster and to maximize my output with minimum effort, I will do it. But if I am playing and having fun, I don't want any shortcuts. I'm there, I'm enjoying myself, I'm not taking myself seriously, I'm in a state of presence that is different. And I guess maybe the most everyday example of that is with children, right? When they play and when their attention is very focused, but it's relaxed. It's not like a tense state of focusing. That's the invitation that Osho is making to us. As for the other part of your question, does he mean to play, with emptiness and fullness? Yes, this is explained in the other sutra, which says, now I lost it, which says basically, consider knowing and not knowing, consider existing and not existing, kind of play with the two opposites, and then set them aside so that you can be. So in the tantric, in the tantric understanding, it's always going to be in duality, be in the world of manifestation, be in, in the drama of life, and then at the same time be beyond those dualities and those oppositions.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, Jim had to go. And I'm just going through our chat and people saying, thank you, beautiful, thank you, super rich, deep presentation, thank you. Everything in life is a practice for spiritual progress. And then Susu says, my question is, do you think Osho philosophy is more Eastern or Western situated in? And then what makes it like that? Thank you for your presentation and the great impression of sensations.
Should I tackle that question?
Yes, please.
I think really Osho was a great bridge, someone who was born in India, who at the same time had access to also, the traditional education of India, but also a Western education. And he taught in a university in in India. And then when he started to go more into his spiritual teacher phase, he almost immediately attracted both Eastern and Western students. So he was a natural bridge. At the core, I would say that it's a question that we can look at it in many ways, but at the core, I would say still that Osho was the product or the embodiment of an Eastern way of looking at life. For example, in the sense that he gave a lot of importance and a lot of attention to inner life, and he was inner process oriented. However, at some point, we don't know if it's for his decision or someone else's decision, he felt that he had to go more deeply into the West. And in the way that he was, like everything exaggerated and, big dimension, he moved his whole ashram to the United States. And there kind of brought the Western symbols to an extreme. He had like 12 or 13 Rolls Royces that then he said that none of them was his, but he played with that. But in my feeling, that was to expose on one hand, the illusion of the Western way of life. And by the way, he was very critical of the illusion of the Eastern way of life as well. He was critical of both. And also to show that all paths at the end of the day lead to the same destination. And he was very antagonistic of, for example, the Brahmins and the Pundits of India and their righteousness and their, high proclaims. So I think he was a natural bridge. And also in some way, for this reason, he was misunderstood by everybody.
Yeah. Well, maybe not everybody, not by you for sure.
Yes, but yeah, by the East and the West. Thank you, Shushu.
Now, I really would like to bring in Laura. Laura, do you mind actually talking with us? I'd like to have your comments about my comparison between the Osho Sutras and the haiku. What's your feeling on that? Georg, would you mind to open Laura's audio or maybe her video too? That would be much appreciated. Maybe to just take a minute or so. Hopefully Georg is with us because I know that he's attending several Zoom presentations.
And while we wait for Laura, George, I just want to say that
Yeah.
something that we can be sure about is that Osho loved Zen. There's so many references to Zen, stories, and it's not by chance that this translation of the Vijñan Bhairava Tantra that he was using is contained in a Western book of Zen that is a collection of also haikus. So he was very, very fond of Zen, and he was very, very fond of Sufi Islam. This we can say pretty much for sure.
That's for sure. Wow, no, thank you. Well, there's no surprise that maybe that I had that intuition. I don't know. Can you hear us? I really would like to bring Laura on. If you can hear us, then please give access to her audio, because I'd love to hear from her and maybe from others too. But maybe Georg is not listening, maybe in these airwaves. But until that actually happens, I'd like to is why Osho, and you did answer this actually question in different ways, but like to ask this question again from you, maybe reply in the way you wish. That why Osho influenced you, touched you more than any other teacher? Could you actually put some, why him? Why he's different to you? Why he's special to you?
It is not exactly the case that he touched me more than any other teachers.
No?
There is a few teachers in my life that touched me deeply, and he's definitely one of them. But Tantra, through Osho and then through my own 8-9 year long investigation and practice and deep study, was definitely one of my big influences in life. Why? I believe somehow it has to do with temperament, with my own temperament. I think in some ways, I think that, India, this great mama of spirituality for all of us, really, has given options. It's like, are you more of a devotional type of person? Well, here's something that you can work with, and the whole lineage of bhakti yoga, etc. Do you want to work, do you want to like access states through your body and through movement? Okay, so here's hatha yoga, for example. And for me, it seducted me in a good way, I would say, because of his rebel component. And that maybe not so much anymore, but it was a big part of my temperament. I've been a political activist for a lot of my life, and I thought very wrongly that everything that was spiritual was like soft-spoken and kind of, feel good and never, with no humor. And here I go and read Osho, and there is so much humor and kind of naughty jokes as well in his presentation, and so much sarcasm and willingness to be controversial. All of a sudden I was like, wow, this is like a rebel personality in the world of spirituality. And nowadays, I think I moved beyond that way of thinking, but at that time it allowed someone with my temperament to stop judging spirituality and Indian spirituality and going like, but this is really powerful and interesting and it speaks to me. So I think it was a matter of temperament in my case.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you. Well, definitely you two have lots in common, for sure. And I'm so sorry, Laura, that for whatever reason we couldn't bring you in. I don't know what's happened. Maybe Goro got, I don't know.
She did write something on the chat though, Georgie, if we want to read it.
Said that probably a thank you in brief. Mystic haiku for me is the relationship between the root of the formless bubbling up into the words as form. Thank you, Laura. Yeah,
very connected to what we were exploring before.
absolutely. Yeah, I love her haikus, really. I love reading her haikus very much. Well, Raffaello, thank you so much for these two amazing presentations. I learned so much from you. I love the book and I would love to hear more from you. So I'm going to suggest, I don't know if you offer it or not, to extend something more about Osho in terms of a course, but maybe we can explore that in a different discussion. And thank you for the attendees and for being with us, and see you in a month's time, where it will be Sana Land going to share David White's book, The Crossing the Unknown. So another great book indeed. And Raffaello, I look forward to seeing you in Chartres. And that will be wonderful to share amazing moments there. And thank you all. And stay safe and well. All the very best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.